Hi guys, welcome back to my studio. I'm Gina, and in today's video I'm going to be tackling something I have never tried before, and it is to create vegetables out of polymer clay. And this is something that I've had on my bucket list for a little bit of time, or at least on the list, not necessarily a bucket list, but on the list of techniques that I've always been wanting to learn and to try and to give a go. And I thought, what better way to do that after last week's video, which is creating a kitchen. And so I got a little bit of inspiration from there and thought, why not give it a go now? So I've been reading a couple of books from the library on how to create it, and also been asking a few people around on the best way to go about it. So I'm going to use all of those things that I've learnt and researched, but there's no better way than actually getting in and giving it a go. So let's get started. So I got this book from the library, and I thought this would be a great little basic book on how to create some vegetables. So I'm going to follow these instructions on how to create them. So first of all, I'm going to mix up some orange for the carrots, and the orange that I had was quite bright, so I've just mixed in a sort of caramel kind of colour just to tone it down just slightly. And then to begin with, I'm just going to create some little cone shapes in basically the shapes of a carrot. I'm going to use this little small ball stylus and just poke a little indentation into the top of the carrot, because this is actually where the stalk is going to go. And then once that's all done, I'm just going to take my craft knife. You can actually use either side. I ended up by using the sharp side, which is probably not that great considering I'm actually holding it. And just to create some marks across the carrot from where they've been growing. So just trying to create a little bit of realism into the polymer clay. And then once that's all done, they will be set aside ready for baking. And in the meantime, I've mixed up another lot of clay, which is just green and a little bit of white. And then I'm just rolling these out really, really thin, just to a few different lengths. And once these are baked, I'll cut these down to size, and these will create the stems. And so now I'm going to move on to creating some potatoes. Now this clay that I've got is actually quite old. It's actually from really crumbly. It does come together, but it took me a good 5 minutes just working with the clay just to try and bring it together. And then I actually swapped out my craft mat, because this is the main one that I use, and I've got a couple of smaller ones which I actually swapped out because I had a feeling it was going to make quite a mess. So here we go. It's sort of come together after about, like I say, after about 5 minutes, and then I'm just going to pick off some small pieces and just roll those into sort of ball shapes. These are going to be my potatoes, and there's a technique that I'm going to follow in the book to create some mud effect on them. I think one thing I realized is that I didn't quite have the right color of scenic dust. The one stuff that I've used on previous projects is basically a mix of dirt and grey grout. But the grey is actually too grey for this particular project. It just needed to be a little bit more warmer and a little bit more golden. But I've gone through the process and just putting those into an separate oven-proof dish. And then I'm just going to sprinkle over this grout mixture. You can see here that it's actually really grey. So the idea is that you kind of roll them around in that, and then bake it actually just as in that tray with the grout mix there. So I'm going to move on to creating some tomatoes, and the red that I've got I just felt was probably a little bit too rosy red, and so I had a little bit of orange left over from the carrot mix, so I'm just going to mix that in, as well as some translucent polymer clay also, because I just wanted to give it a little bit more depth into the actual colour. So here we can sort of see it's slightly a little bit more muted, and so I'm just going to roll out some snakes of clay, and then just cut these into some sort of smaller pieces, and then I'm just going to roll these individually into little balls or tomato sized pieces. These are actually quite tiny. This is the first time I've actually used polymer clay in this sort of format. I've used it a couple of times in some other different projects, but not for creating food. One thing I did realize is that the importance of having clean hands, like the amount of times that the clay, especially when it gets warmed up, it becomes quite sticky. So yeah, I just wanted to make some little leaves here for the tomatoes, and these are so tiny. And I think that having a silicone mat or a silicone thimble or something like that would be brilliant, because I just felt that the polymer clay was just sticking to my fingers. So just continuing on creating some little leaves, so just basically around about 4 leaves per tomato, and I don't do all of them. I only do enough to sit on top of a bunch of tomatoes, if that makes sense. So moving on to the cabbages and also the cauliflower, which is the other one that I'm going to make as well. So this is going to be the cabbages, and I'm going to start by creating the leaf pattern. So this is the process from the book, which is really helpful, and it's just a matter of taking 2 different shades of green and then just cutting them into a leaf pattern. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to interlace the light green in with the dark green to create the veins of the leaf. So I'm just going to take this light green clay and press it out really thin. In an ideal world, I guess having a roller or a pasta machine or something like that to make it really flat, but this was quite a small little project, so I was quite comfortable just pressing that out with my fingers to make it as even as possible. So I'm just cutting off any of the excess here, and then once I've done the 2 sides of the leaf, I'm going to create a middle stem as well, just with a slightly thicker piece of the light green. And so here you can start to see the leaf pattern coming into place, but I'm not finished yet. So I'm just going to add in some additional veining to it as well, and just by cutting out a couple of sections where each one of those main veins meets the edge of the leaf. So I'm just going to flatten out this piece of clay to quite thin. It's probably about 1 millimeter thin, or maybe even just a little bit less than that. So my hands are getting quite warm. The clay is sticking to them. But you'll get the idea of what I'm trying to achieve by putting this extra bit of clay. And it does actually make a difference, right? Once it all comes together and gets stretched out a little bit as well, I think it really does make quite a difference. I was actually quite surprised at how easy this was to put together, and then actually how awesome the effect was once it's actually all stretched out. So that's basically what I'm doing here. I'm just sort of slowly working my way around, because I didn't want to blend the colours together, but I just wanted to stretch it out. So it's about 1/2 inch, I guess. And so then I'm just very, very carefully with this razor blade just cutting very thin strips of the clay. And then I'm going to take a central piece and start wrapping these around. So this is the cabbage that I'm going to create. Just start wrapping those leaves around to create that sort of cabbage-like effect. And so what I do with each individual leaf, I just sort of flatten it out just a little bit, especially on the edges, so that it's not so blunt. And then I just work my way, adding the leaves around to create sort of that overlap, almost like as if you're creating or building out a rose or a flower. These are the leaves of the cabbage, sort of overlap each other. And so what I'm trying to do here is just sort of make sure that they're not all stacked on top of each other, moving it around to whatever looks right, and then just moving those, sort of spreading them out a little bit. And here you can start to see it coming into what looks like a cabbage, and I'm really happy with how this has actually turned out. I was actually quite surprised at one, how easy it was to put together, and actually how great effect that it had. Yeah, so I'm just going to cut off the bottom there, and then just make sure that the leaves are all sort of spread out as much as they can. And so to make the cauliflower, it's basically the same process, but just the center piece, I've just taken some white clay, and then I'm just taking a pointy tool and just sort of roughing up the texture on the top to give it that sort of cauliflower type texture. So I'm kind of going in and poking little holes in it, and then also just sort of roughing it up as well, just to kind of create that bit of texture. And then I'm going to wrap this with some more of the leaves, which here you can sort of see I'm just sort of flattening out the very edge just a little bit, not too much. If I kind of work it too much, it sort of starts to break away with the heat of my hands. And then again, just overlapping those leaves, just like I did with the cabbage, and just making sure that we're not sort of stacking them too much on top of each other, and just working around, just making sure that it looks right. This one isn't going to need as many leaves as the cabbage because obviously they've got the centerpiece of the cauliflower. And so here we are, here they are all baked, and these have come out really super cute. All of the tomatoes are going to go into this pan, and I'm just going to stack the ones with the leaves on them on the top, so it makes it look like the whole thing has got leaves on them. And then with these little crates, these are going to be for the vegetables, so I'm going to put those in there. So to finish off the carrots, what I'm going to do is just cut these stalks to length, and then I am going to glue them into place with just a little bit of tacky glue. So yeah, I'm just going to work my way through those and just allow them to dry before I move on to the next step. This material here is preserved lichen, and it's been coloured this green colour, and I'm going to be using it to create the stalks of the carrots. So I'm just tearing off some small pieces and then gluing those to the stalks. And so what I'm doing here is I'm just creating a bit of a brown wash, and I'm just going to rub that over the surface of the carrots just to pick out those details that we've added in. So those little cut lines that were put across, and any of the other details that will come out, and this actually really does help kind of bring the whole thing together. So once that's all done, and I'll sort of work my way through all of that, and then I kind of use that same brown paint, my favourite brown paint, and I'm putting a wash over the crates just to kind of make them a little bit more lived in, just to kind of add a little bit more character. And then I'm just going to let those all dry overnight before I move on to the next step. So these are my potatoes, which are an absolute fail, but I'm still going to put them into the project. You just really won't see them. But I think it was a really good lesson to learn around what the idea of the book was trying to say and actually how it came out together. So I'm just creating these little bunches of carrots just with a bit of twine, and I can actually pull that quite tightly together, and then it just really does look like a little bunch of carrots, which I'm really stoked with. And I just create 2 bunches of those. And then with the crates, I still felt that they were just too clean, so I'm just going to go over it with a black wash, a very light black wash, and then just concentrate a bit more heavier black at the bottom. So by just putting the wash over the top and then the black at the bottom of it, just allows it to bleed, so it just gets quite a nice ombre effect across the crate. And I'm really just going to do the outside of it on both of them. And just one last thing that I wanted to create for these vegetables was a chopping board. So I'm just going to create, this is a bit of balsa wood, and I'm just going to create a bit of a chopping board and then just paint that up with that same brown paint. And I just think I mixed in a little bit of yellow there as well, just to kind of add a bit of variation. And then once I've done that, I also go over it with a little bit of a black wash, just to kind of age it up a little bit as well. It's just sort of a nice, easy effect to do. I did realise that it's probably a little bit dark, so what I'm going to do is just go back in and just grab a paper towel and just dab off any of that excess, just so that it's not completely all black. And yeah, so that's the little chopping board. I have got this little cleaver, which is pretty much like a charm. So I'm just going to wrap some twine around the handle and then pull it through. So it just allows it to sort of knot itself. And then I'm just going to cut off the excess and then put a bit of glue around the handle, just to make sure that all those little loose fibres don't go everywhere. And here's our supervisor coming in to have a look at the vegetables. So I've just cut a little slit into the chopping board, so it makes it look like it's been stabbed into the board. So here's my potatoes. I'm going to put those in the bottom because they're just a bit grey. If I was going to do them again, I will do them with a much warmer yellowy based clay. And so then I'm just going to lay the carrots on top, and this is how I'm going to have the crates sort of sitting. While I know that the potatoes there, you're not really going to actually see a lot of them anyway. And then layering the cauliflower and cabbages, and then that's basically it for the little crates and the vegetables, which is really cool. And then just to finish off the chopping board, I've got a couple of carrots there and a couple of tomatoes that I'm just going to glue onto the board just to finish that one off as well. And then lastly, I've just glued these into place. So there we go, it's all finished, and oh my god, this was such a fun project to actually do. There is still so much to learn, and even with a couple of things that didn't quite turn out the way that I expected, I'm really happy with the cauliflower and cabbages. The carrots look awesome and turned out really super cute too. The tomatoes were so tiny, they were making my eyes go cross-eyed a little bit, but you know, that was all part of the fun and all part of creating miniatures. So if you like this video, hit that like button, and it really does help the channel. And if you've come this far and you still haven't subscribed, please consider doing that. It really does also help the channel as well. And without further ado, let's have a look at the final result, and until next time, I'll see you then. Bye for now.